The calm before the storm, in suburban Boston, back in the serene neighborhoods bordering downtown Boston, the day always started with the soft glow of sunrise filtering through leafy maples and stately oaks. For four young women sharing a classic red brick townhouse on Willow Lane, those mornings felt like the kind of American dream sung about in old pop songs. Olivia, at 26, was the heart of the group. Working long hours as a junior architect at a downtown firm, she still found time every Sunday to brew coffee for her roommates before anyone else was awake. Her laughter carried down the hallway, turning even a gloomy Monday into something worth looking forward to. Anna, the ever-curious software developer, preferred winding down with a book on the porch swing, her glasses sliding to the tip of her nose as she lost herself in mystery novels. Chloe, wild-haired, in perpetual motion, managed a local art gallery and insisted that every meal, even takeout on Fridays, was an event worthy of candles and loud music. The fourth, Megan, was Olivia's closest friend from college, always perfectly put together with a dry sense of humor. Megan was the unofficial problem solver, the one who helped mend broken faucets and broken hearts alike. Their days blended into easy routines. Morning jogs by the Charles River, late-night kitchen dance parties, movie marathons sprawled across patchwork couches. On weekends, they'd pile into Chloe's ancient Jeep and head to Cape Cod, windows down, singing along to throwback tunes. If anyone asked, they'd say theirs was an untouchable sisterhood, a small circle of trust set against a world that moved too fast and cared too little. Yet beneath those picture-perfect moments, subtle tensions flickered, little jokes that stung longer than intended, sideways glances across bustling coffee shops, unspoken competition over new friendships. But none of that seemed important. Not yet. For Olivia, these peaceful days in Boston's leafy suburbs would forever be frozen in memory as the last, gentle exhale before everything changed. Friendship under the lens of doubt. For years, Harper thought she had found her person in Emily. The pair had become inseparable since their freshman year at Boston College, bonding over late-night ramen runs, shared dreams of traveling the world, and a mutual love for indie music. Most afternoons found them sprawled on the hardwood floor of their cozy living room, laughing until their cheeks ached while swapping stories from their eclectic group of friends. Within the sun-dappled walls of their suburban house, it felt as though nothing and no one could come between them. But as those golden college memories faded and adulthood crept in, Harper began to feel an undercurrent of suspicion buzzing quietly beneath the surface of their friendship. Sometimes, she'd catch Emily watching her conversations a little too closely, or notice subtle shifts in Emily's tone whenever someone new joined the group. There were moments when Emily seemed too quick to insert herself into Harper's plans, always eager to be present at her side. But Harper couldn't shake the question. Was it out of loyalty or something else entirely? Red flags started to emerge during their weekly gatherings. Harper would confide in Emily about her crushes or frustrations at work, only to hear from someone else days later that Emily had already shared these secrets, painting Harper in a less flattering light. It unsettled her, but she brushed it aside, chalking it up to misunderstanding or harmless gossip. Still, doubt took root. Small, easily missed exchanges grew larger in Harper's mind. The way Emily would position herself in the center of every get-together. How she seemed to have a natural knack for winning over Harper's other friends, sometimes bordering on possessiveness. Was it normal for best friends to feel threatened, even just a little, by each other? One evening, After a dinner party that saw Emily basking in the attention of a newcomer Harper had invited, Harper lay awake, reviewing the details. The way Emily accidentally monopolized conversations, her casual jokes that cut a little too deep, the lingering glances that felt almost territorial. All hints that their friendship might not be as straightforward as Harper had always believed. As Harper tried to untangle her feelings, she realized the bond she once regarded as unbreakable was growing frail under the weight of suspicion. The laughter that once came so effortlessly gained sharp edges, and Harper started to question whether true friendship could survive when trust began to crack. The first cut, when love is stolen. Rachel had always believed in loyalty between friends. She trusted the kind of bond that came from years of living under the same roof, weathering heartbreak together and swapping secrets on cold Boston nights. So when Josh entered her life, a new project manager at the downtown tech startup, freshly arrived from Chicago, her first instinct was to introduce him to the house, get her girl's seal of approval. Josh fit in seamlessly, quick with a joke, great at cooking, and genuinely interested in all the women's rambling stories. He was tall, sandy-haired, wore glasses, and loved indie movies. A quiet, thoughtful guy who caught Rachel's heart almost immediately. At first, everything went the way it should. Group dinners, board game nights, late-night pizza, and movie marathons, where Josh melded smoothly into the group. Rachel and he grew closer, their conversations lingering long after everyone else had dozed off. The rest of the house noticed, teased them gently, and Rachel let herself believe this was the start of something safe and good. But sometime around Thanksgiving, she started to see signs she didn't want to notice. Beth, her quiet, artsy, deeply complicated best friend, began taking more of an interest in Josh. It started innocently. "Let's invite Josh to the gallery." Or, "Josh mentioned he likes hiking. Maybe we should all go to Walden Pond." But quickly, things blurred. Rachel would see Beth and Josh whispering in the kitchen, laughing about inside jokes Rachel didn't understand, planning outings that didn't always include her. One Friday, Rachel came home early from work to find them sitting on the porch swing, heads bent close, deep in conversation. Beth jumped up instantly, making an excuse about helping Josh rehearse for a company talent show. Rachel laughed it off, but a cold pang settled deep in her chest. Were they just friends? Was Beth overstepping, or was Rachel imagining it all, seeing threats where there were none? After that, it only got worse. Messages from Josh grew shorter, more distracted. He started missing their one-on-one dinners, apologizing vaguely, or saying he was tired. Finally, after a week of awkward distance, Rachel learned the truth, not from either of them, but from Lauren, who confessed she'd seen Beth and Josh sharing drinks downtown, lost in each other's company well past midnight. Rachel wanted to believe there had to be an explanation, but Beth's behavior changed. Suddenly, colder, defensive, quick to snap when asked simple questions. She avoided Rachel's eyes at the breakfast table, spent more time locked away painting, and drifted out for errands at odd hours. Lauren tried to comfort Rachel, offering wine and a shoulder, while they replayed every memory of the past weeks. Melissa vowed support, saying she'd sensed something off too, but hadn't wanted to stir up drama. For the first time since moving into the house, Rachel felt truly out of place, like an outsider in the very home she'd worked so hard to foster. Her instinct was to withdraw, lick her wounds in silence, and shoulder the pain alone. But as the days passed, suspicion hardened into certainty. Rachel realized she had ignored too many warning signs. Weeks of secret texts, odd laughs, and unexplained absences. In her gut, she knew Beth had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The betrayal stung doubly, cutting through the core of friendship she'd once trusted without reservation. But what hurt more was the realization that everyone else had seen the cracks forming long before Rachel found the evidence. Loyalty, she reflected bitterly, sometimes blinded you to the truth until it was too late to look away. Endurance and performance. Sarah wasn't the loudest in the house. In fact, she took pride in being the observer, the quiet one tucked at the window seat with her Kindle, or the first to volunteer to do the dishes after a rowdy Friday dinner. Hers was a calm energy, always present, rarely noticed. But behind Sarah's gentle smile was a mind that cataloged every small slight and every barely perceived betrayal. Like hidden tally marks behind wallpaper, the fallout from Brooke and Adam's relationship had thrown the Maplewood house into a kind of organized chaos. Sides were taken softly, some supporting Rachel, others unwilling to fully commit, most feeling caught in the crosscurrents. Sarah, for her part, cultivated neutrality. Outwardly, she comforted Rachel after nights spent crying in her room and assured Brooke that everyone makes mistakes. But Sarah noticed patterns. This wasn't the first time Brooke had flirted at the edge of someone's trust, nor the first time a rift in the group threatened the delicate balance they worked so hard to maintain. In whispered confidences and careful observations, Sarah pieced together a quieter truth. This house, for all its warmth and charm, had always harbored undercurrents of competition and exclusion. She collected small pieces of evidence, innocuous texts Rachel never saw, fragments of conversations between Brooke and Zoe when they thought no one was listening. The way Lauren's reassurances to Rachel grew more hollow each week. Instead of confronting Brooke or Rachel outright, Sarah became a master in the art of emotional disguise. She listened attentively, offered advice without taking sides, and quietly gathered support among those who, like her, felt uneasy with the group's new status quo. When Lauren hosted dinners, Sarah brought extra helpings of candor, gently nudging everyone back toward discussions about trust, loyalty, and forgiveness. To outsiders, Sarah appeared as the ultimate team player, the friend who adapted, soothed ruffled feelings, filled awkward silences with a well-timed joke. But inside, she was building a case, layer by layer. She traced how Rachel's isolation was made worse by Lauren's veiled indifference and Brooke's calculated charm. She memorized every detail: the time Brooke's laughter faltered in Madison's presence, the twist in Lauren's mouth as she reassured Rachel that things will get better, the slow erosion of Zoe's willingness to host Sunday movie nights. With every passing day, Sarah's resolve hardened. The cost of pretending was heavy, but she carried it willingly for the sake of evidence, for the possibility of justice, and, perhaps, for the faint hope that truth would one day cut through the house's dense fog of unspoken grievances. Sarah played her role perfectly. She held the group together in public, even as she mapped out the lines of division in private. She endured uncomfortable brunches, mediated conversations teetering on the edge of confrontation, skillfully concealing her own disappointment. Outwardly, she played the peacemaker, the optimist, masking her exhaustion behind kind words and steady patience. Through it all, Sarah promised herself that her endurance was not for nothing. When the moment arrived that the group would be ready to confront its own fractures, she would have the words, the compassion, and the cold, hard proof to bring hidden wounds into the light. Until then, she waited, ever the quiet, force in a house built equally
You should drop
on
this
laughter
case, Emily.
and on secrets.
For
The
your own
grand
safety.
unmasking, when truth takes center stage. For weeks, Sarah mulled over the tangled web of tension that had settled uneasily across the house. She had watched friendships curdle, trust evaporate, and joy, once effortless, get replaced by brittle politeness and cryptic side glances. She understood better than anyone that the heart of the issue was not a single betrayal, but rather a silent rot that had threaded itself through every corner of their group dynamic. By now, secrets and suspicion hung over their home like low thunderclouds. It weighed on Sarah especially because she knew what others only guessed. The damage stemmed from Julie's quiet manipulation, undermining confidences, sowing discord, and pulling strings from the shadows. Sarah believed exposing the truth was the only path to healing. But how does anyone reveal a betrayal so subtle it leaves no fingerprints? How do you conjure proof of wounds inflicted by words whispered behind closed doors, or trust eroded by slow, deliberate exclusion? Watching the harmonious facade crumble, Sarah resolved she would not stand idly by. She had to act, not just for herself, but for the house she had come to love, the fragile friendships she hoped to salvage, and, above all, her own integrity. She began meticulously collecting evidence, saving text conversations, recalling times and dates of ambiguous interactions, quietly encouraging others to share their stories when things felt off. Every detail became a piece of an invisible puzzle she hoped to solve. She listened for patterns in arguments, traced how disagreements always, curiously, circled back to Julie, or her influence. Each time a rumor cast one roommate against another, Sarah tracked its origin, and more often than not, it led directly to Julie's gentle but insistent suggestions. Formulating a plan wasn't easy. Sarah's mind ran on questions. How do you bring the truth into the open without seeming vindictive or vengeful? Would anyone believe her, or would she be accused of paranoia or jealousy? Yet the alternative, perpetuating the unease, letting trust die a slow death, seemed the greater crime. She realized there had to be a confrontation, not an ambush, but an orchestrated reckoning. She didn't want revenge. She wanted clarity. She wanted her home back. So Sarah chose the moment and stage with care. She offered to host a house night, an old tradition meant for decompressing after a long week, full of gentle music, homemade snacks, and cozy conversation. She knew the familiar comforts would help chip away at everyone's defenses. As evening fell, the laughter sounded stilted, and the wine flowed a little too eagerly, but nobody suspected what Sarah had in store. Julie took her usual place in the middle of the sectional, expertly charming and steering dialogue. Megan recounted a work complaint. Madison reminisced about undergrad. And Zoe, who had begun disappearing into her room earlier and earlier, actually smiled for the first time in days. Sarah watched, waiting for her opening. When conversation turned to the topic of friendship and honesty, she leaned in gently. Why does it feel like things have changed? We used to talk about everything. Now, I don't know. It feels like there are things we're all afraid to say. Madison nodded, voice careful but clear. Yeah, it's like sometimes I worry. If I share too much, someone might use it against me. Zoe added. I felt that too. Like, when did we start doubting each other? The unease was palpable, the temperature in the room dipping a notch lower as people darted quick, searching glances. Julie tried to smooth it over, offering her patented diplomatic smile. Every group has rough patches. We're all under a lot of stress. Work, relationships, life. But this time, Sarah refused to let the moment slip away. She continued, Sure, We all have stress, but it shouldn't make us suspicious of each other. I've heard things, private things, repeated in ways that twist the truth. And I started keeping track. A hush settled. Julie shifted, tension flickering in her eyes. Sarah stood and retrieved a small folder from her bag. Inside were screenshots of texts sent between Julie and various housemates at strategic, hurtful times. Messages that took confidences and recast them in a negative light. Subtle coaxings meant to isolate one roommate from the next. Carefully edited versions of events fed to whoever would listen. She laid some of the evidence out on the coffee table. I know this is uncomfortable, but these hurtful things didn't come from nowhere. Julie, I can trace nearly every rumor, every moment of doubt, back to you. You've distorted people's words and intentions to serve your own ends. And I think we all deserve to hear your side. If there's an explanation, we want it. But the truth needs daylight. Julie's color drained for the briefest second. Then her smile hardened. So now we're putting people on trial? I'm sorry if things got mixed up, but isn't this a bit dramatic? But the others were already leaning in, pieces slipping into place. Megan spoke softly. I trusted you with things about my family, Julie. And somehow Madison found out. Private things that hurt to share. Zoe, her voice trembling, added, You told me Sarah didn't want me joining your book club. I never understood why she would say that. But I pulled away. I guess I shouldn't have doubted her. The air thickened with a chorus of small, wounded confessions. Each housemate recounted moments when Julie had been the last to speak with them before a misunderstanding or conflict. It became clear the pattern wasn't vague coincidence. Julie's attempts to defend herself only strengthened the resolve of the others. Her denial, evasions, and subtle victim playing didn't land as they once did. The spell was broken. Sarah's heart pounded, but she pressed on, trying to anchor everything in compassion, not malice. This isn't about shaming anyone. I understand people act out of fear or jealousy or just the need to belong, but we do need honesty and trust and the chance to actually address what's happened if we're ever going to move forward. Julie's mask began to falter. She looked from face to face, Megan, who now blinked back tears and anger. Madison, arms folded protectively. Zoe, visibly shaking. Julie's usual composure was gone, replaced by a defensiveness that flirted with desperation. She accused Sarah of orchestrating all this just to turn everyone against her, of being jealous, of making mountains out of molehills. The accusations bounced weakly. And when it was clear the group had seen the pattern, Julie finally slumped back on the sofa, silent, her eyes glistening. It wasn't the dramatic confession Sarah had once imagined. Real life rarely gave you the neat closure of a primetime drama. Instead, there was mostly pain and a heavy sense of loss. But there was also a palpable relief as the group exhaled. For the first time in months, no one seemed confused about where they stood. No secrets remained unearthed. Tears were shed, apologies offered, genuine, raw, and sometimes incomplete, but real. The room was blanketed in an aching quiet. Megan apologized to Zoe for doubting her motives. Madison admitted she'd been pulling away to avoid drama, but had wound up more hurt and isolated than ever. Even Rachel, who'd largely stayed out of the crossfire, confessed she'd noticed something felt wrong, but hadn't known what to do. Sarah didn't glory in Julie's discomfort, nor did she relish the awkwardness that followed. The confrontation was necessary, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like setting a broken bone, painful, but essential for healing. Sarah offered Julie a final invitation to speak her truth, to explain, to apologize. It doesn't have to end like this. she said gently. "But we can't ignore what's happened." Julie finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared that I'd lose all of you. I thought if I kept everyone close to me, I'd always have a place here. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I'm sorry." The group was left to decide what forgiveness could look like. Some were ready to move slowly forward, others were not. But the knot of secrets and suspicion was undone. The house, for the first time in ages, felt lighter. There was room to breathe. In the days that followed, Sarah and the others navigated the aftermath with care and intentionality. They held open, sometimes messy conversations about boundaries and trust. There were awkward silences at breakfast, stiff exchanges at the dinner table, but there were also gentle check-ins and the tentative forging of new routines. The experience sparked change, not just in how they interacted, but in the foundation of their friendship. As wounds surfaced, so did genuine compassion and understanding. Julie, facing the consequence of her actions, withdrew for a few weeks, giving the rest of the house time to recalibrate. Sarah organized afternoons in the park, encouraging laughter and games, even when the memories of conflict weren't fully gone. Rachel and Madison started a new Sunday ritual, walking by the Charles River, talking through what forgiveness meant and what they each needed in friendship moving forward. Megan, ever the fixer, suggested group check-ins and encouraged honesty, even if it was uncomfortable. House meetings became more structured, offering everyone the space to voice their needs and frustrations. The group openly discussed personal triggers and established ground rules on privacy, gossip, and emotional safety. While not every wound healed instantly, and not everyone found the same path toward forgiveness, progress was visible in small moments: a shared smile, a joke at breakfast, a quiet apology offered in the hallway. For Sarah, the fallout proved a mixed blessing. She felt exhausted by the emotional labor, but also deeply proud. She had refused to let silence and suspicion dictate the terms of their lives. More than once, she reflected on how fragile trust really is, and how quickly it can slip away if not carefully nurtured. Sitting by the window one night, Sarah allowed herself to hope the ordeal would stand as a test, not of who was right or wrong, but of the group's willingness to choose truth over comfort, clarity over secrecy. In time, the air in the house shifted. The shared kitchen no longer felt like a battleground, and Sarah was able to look each roommate in the eye without a pang of doubt. There were still conflicts, as in any household of ambitious, spirited young women, but they were met head-on and resolved directly. The old cycle of whispered confidences and strategic silences faded, replaced by transparency and, at long last, a deeper sense of mutual respect. The process of rebuilding was slow, but it remade the group in ways that went beyond apology. They allowed each other to grieve what had been lost, not just a person, but an era of presumed innocence, an ease they would never fully reclaim. In its place, they crafted something a touch less idyllic, but far more real: connection informed by honesty, laced with the knowledge that friendships, like families, are not infallible. Through it all, Sarah learned her own capacity for courage. It wasn't just about collecting evidence or orchestrating the grand confrontation. It was in every quiet decision to listen more openly, to forgive more freely, and to speak hard truths with kindness. Little by little, laughter returned, not forced, but genuine. They toasted to new beginnings, not forgetting the pain, but determined never to let fear or suspicion rule their home again. And as autumn crept over Boston, painting the city gold and crimson, the leafy house on Willow Lane found its way back to warmth, a space transformed by honesty, scarred but stronger, ready to welcome both the sorrows and the joys that real friendship always brings. The truth unveiled, and the bitter end as the evening sunlight spilled through the tall bay windows. A hush fell over the house on Willow Lane, settling into the cracks of old wooden floors and the seams of worn corduroy couches. With the confrontation finally behind them, a stillness descended, holding the group in a fragile suspension between anger, sadness, and relief. The truth, long buried beneath layers of denial and half-hearted excuses, had finally come to light. And now, everyone was left grappling with the consequences, no longer able to shield themselves from the raw impact of honesty, nor to pretend that everything would soon snap back to normal. The first days after Julie's exposure moved in a daze. No one quite knew how to talk to her, or even about her. The housemates tiptoed around each other, an unspoken agreement lingering in the air. Keep things civil, at least until feelings stopped vibrating with the sharpness of betrayal. Dinners grew subdued, marked by forced politeness and the occasional, honest apology. Messages landed quietly in group chats. Does anyone need anything from the store? I'll be late coming home. The boisterous laughter that had once been the background music of their lives was gone. Instead, there was a silence that creaked with grief and uncertainty. Sarah often found herself retreating to the solitude of her room, where she replayed the confrontation in her mind. She wondered about the price of courage, how stepping into the center of conflict required more than just evidence and resolve, but also a willingness to carry the collective pain. She remembered the look in Julie's eyes as the group's accusations became undeniable. Shock, then denial, then something closer to heartbreak. Despite all that Sarah knew, she couldn't shake the ache of sympathy. Every betrayal, she realized, didn't just destroy trust, it isolated the betrayer, too. For all her flaws, Julie wasn't some villain hatched in darkness. She was one of them, shaped by the same pressures to fit, to belong, to be irreplaceable in a world that measured worth in acceptance. The rest of the group, too, moved through a complex maze of grief. Megan, ever the pragmatic one, organized a house meeting days after the confrontation. Her goal was to lay everything out. No more secrets, no more misdirection, just each person's perspective, raw and undiluted. Madison was blunt, insisting that forgiveness wasn't a right, but a process, something that might never result in full restoration. Zoe, fragile and shaken, admitted she feared her own tendency to avoid conflict had helped enable what happened. Rachel, still mending from earlier wounds, wondered aloud whether some fractures could ever be patched or whether they were better left as reminders of what not to allow again. They sat together late into the evening, sometimes silent, sometimes bristling with emotion, but always circling back to the central truth. Their circle had been breached, but not because one person was evil. It was because everyone let go of vigilance, allowed rumors to go unchecked, and siloed off their doubts rather than address them as a group. For Julie, the experience was isolating, even humiliating. She retreated to her room, emerging only when necessary, accepting, at last, that her attempts to control the narrative had only led to her own exile. The others gave her space, but with that space came an uneasy emptiness. There were days when she drafted apology messages and deleted them, nights when she wanted to storm into the kitchen and demand her side be heard again. But she could not unring the bell. The evidence Sarah had produced, the screenshots, the timelines, the hurtful messages that had ricocheted from one friend to another, was irrefutable. More than that, So were the emotional wounds, now carried openly by everyone in the house. The mood in the house morphed. No longer charged with suspicion, it now simmered with the slow burn of healing. Sarah, though exhausted, felt a strange sense of peace. She took over many of the small kindnesses that once had been Julie's domain, leaving fresh coffee in the pot, posting encouraging notes on the fridge, suggesting movie nights or group walks. The routine, though tentative, provided a balm. Over long cups of tea, Rachel and Megan talked about boundaries, what they would accept, and what they would never again tolerate. Zoe, emboldened by the process, asked for a new code of conduct, something to guide them when conflicts arose. And Madison, wry, skeptical, honest to a fault, pushed everyone to talk about resentment, about what could be forgiven and what could not. Evenings felt different. There was an unmistakable sense of recovery in the air. At times, laughter returned, rusty but genuine, as though the group was collectively willing it back into existence. They grew bolder in their vulnerability, sometimes admitting when they still felt angry at Julie and at themselves for missing the signs. Pain was named instead of hidden. They moved beyond blame, focusing instead on recognition, accountability, and perhaps the slow redrawing of trust. Meanwhile, Julie watched from afar, sometimes listening through cracked doors, sometimes hearing her name spoken like a bruise that refused to fade. She struggled with shame and anger at the group for rejecting her and at herself for orchestrating her own downfall. Gradually, she began to write in a journal, trying to untangle what it was she truly wanted from these friendships, and whether the price she paid was ever worth the fleeting sense of control she held. Outside of the house, life went on in Boston. The city eased into an unhurried autumn, trees turning brilliant red and gold, students piling into campus libraries, couples walking along the river. For the women of Willow Lane, this changing world was both a comfort and a reminder. The real cost of secrets wasn't just conflict. It was the narrowing of one's own world, their home, once bustling with a constant influx of visitors and plans, now closed ranks, cautiously private. Only a few close confidants were let in, and even then, only after long conversations about trust and respect. Sarah, never one for dramatics, noticed how she herself had changed. She worried less about pleasing others and more about remaining true to her convictions. She called her parents more, checked in with friends who asked nothing more than honesty in return. In the aftermath of the blow-up, she realized just how much energy she'd spent trying to mediate, to keep the peace, to maintain a sense of family among people who were, after all, just flawed young adults searching for belonging. Megan suggested group therapy, and while not everyone accepted, those who did found value in the process. The therapist, a kind-eyed woman with decades of experience in group conflict, asked them, "Do you want everything to feel as it once did? Or do you want to build something new? Messier, yes, but rooted in truth." The question lingered with each of them, forming the shape of a new challenge. Gradually, as weeks became months, the group crafted their own rituals of reconciliation. Sunday breakfasts, once a boisterous scramble, became quieter, but carried new meaning. If someone needed space, they asked for it. If disagreements arose, the group handled them face to face. Apologies became easier, not just for old wounds, but for small daily irritations. A new honesty emerged, one that wasn't fueled by the fear of losing each other, but by the hope that a real friendship could survive darkness if met with transparency. Not everything healed. There were lingering resentments and awkwardness in the kitchen. Sometimes, someone would pause mid-sentence, unsure whether certain jokes or memories were still safe ground. Julie's absence was deeply felt, especially by those who remembered how she'd once held the group together with her spirit and energy. For all the pain she'd caused, her departure created a vacuum that took months to fill. At some point, in early winter, Julie wrote letters to each of her former friends. She didn't ask for forgiveness outright. Instead, she acknowledged every instance where her actions had split the group. Every conversation she'd twisted, every eyelash of trust she'd plucked away for her own comfort. Each letter was different. Some were lengthy, some concise, but all were honest. A few housemates wrote back, offering cautious appreciation. Some chose not to respond, preferring healing in silence. Sarah was perhaps the most changed. She came to see that truth, once freed from secrecy, could serve as both sword and salve. She learned to trust her own perceptions and to act on them, rather than wait for validation. The courage she'd built during the climax of their collective drama now shaped her outside the housework as well. From standing up to her boss's unkindness to supporting friends struggling in their own relationships. In her moments of reflection, she felt gratitude for the ordeal, not for the pain it had brought, but for the depth it revealed in everyone involved. The group, too, gave themselves permission to grieve what had been lost. For Rachel, it meant finding closure over the friendships that would never go back to what they were. For Zoe, it manifested as an almost spiritual commitment to clarity in all future relationships. Madison, finally, spoke of boundaries that would never again be breached, not as walls, but as guides for what real friendship should and should not require. Through it all, small symbols of recovery emerged. Postcards hung on the fridge, declaring radical honesty and friendship minus secrets. A group playlist of songs that had helped them through their toughest days. The gentle, familiar comfort of coffee on stormy afternoons. They learned to accept imperfection not as a flaw, but as the precondition for real human connection. The tenderness of their shared vulnerability became a scar and also a strength. Looking back was often bittersweet. There was nostalgia for the old days, yes, but little longing to return. The night of the confrontation marked a line in the sand. Before and after, innocence and experience, comfort and clarity. In the end, everyone, Julie included, had to accept the bittersweet truth that friendship, like living in the heart of a city, was beautiful because it was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes devastating. As spring edged in at last, thawing the last holdouts of ice along the Charles and coaxing daffodils from beds in nearby gardens, the Willow Lane house took its place in the city's steady renewal. The women, all changed, all marked by the ordeal, were no longer bound together by delusion or half-truths. What kept them connected now was choice, an ongoing, imperfect, fragile but earnest commitment to face one another in the light, come what may. This, Sarah realized one morning as she watched sunlight warm the breakfast table, was the true gift of truth. Awkward, sometimes ugly, but ultimately liberating. Friendships didn't shatter because of honesty. They broke apart because honesty was denied. If the price of living after secrets was a certain loss of innocence, it was a fair trade for the authenticity that followed. And so, another chapter began in their shared Boston story. Not with perfect trust, but with a willingness to try again, to rebuild, to honor the cost of what had been lost and the worth of what remained. The final lesson. For weeks after the storm, a strange peace settled over the now quiet house on Willow Lane. It wasn't the cheerful harmony of the past, but more like the hush that follows a powerful summer rainstorm. The kind that leaves puddles everywhere, but also a freshness that hints at new beginnings. The very air seemed changed. Lighter, yes, but still echoing with the consequences of truth unveiled. This was the moment when the group, especially Sarah, confronted not just the remains of fractured friendships, but the enduring question of what these trials had meant and what was to be salvaged from the ruins. Self-reflection and growing pains. In the weeks following the upheaval, Sarah found herself retreating often to the window seat, a warm mug in her hands, and her gaze drifting across the city's autumn palette. She replayed not only the confrontation, but every subtle moment of discomfort that had preceded it, the slip of trust, the pain of suspicion, the mounting evidence she'd collected with equal parts dread and determination. Had it all been worth it? Had honesty, in all its raw messiness, truly done more good than harm? Friends and housemates moved more cautiously around one another. Gone was the artificial ease and forced laughter. In its place, Sarah noticed a new kind of sincerity, a willingness to look each other in the eye, to express small vulnerabilities, to apologize when nerves frayed. Rachel and Megan hashed out old wounds over long walks. Madison became the unlikely champion of the no secrets, no passive aggression rule. And Zoe, who had always hung back, now spoke up about boundaries. In the absence of the one who had caused the sharpest rupture, the rest of the house began to reshape itself, tentatively, imperfectly, and with an honesty deeper than before, choosing compassion amid disillusionment. Sarah didn't pretend that things were simple, or that each woman could reconcile at the same pace. There were setbacks, nights when grief resurfaced, days when someone's absence at brunch reopened a half-healed wound. But underneath, something had shifted. The group began seeing each other less as flawless friends or convenient accomplices, and more as real, complicated individuals, each struggling, each deserving of compassion, even when at their worst. She watched as Rachel, who had felt most betrayed, stopped measuring every word and started laughing again. Megan grew less determined to fix everything and instead listened more, sometimes sitting in silence with Sarah long past midnight, both of them sipping tea in a world too restless for perfect closure. Madison, who once used sarcasm to hide her fear of conflict, learned to say, "I don't know what to say, but I want to understand." Even Zoe, gentle and previously overlooked, became the group's unofficial conscience, reminding them when old patterns threatened to creep back in, gently urging the table to stay together, even as some days felt harder than others. Forgiveness, boundaries, and new rituals. Forgiveness, Sarah learned, was not a single act, but a process, a willingness to let go of the fantasy of what their group once was and to make room for something truer. The women created new rituals out of necessity. Sunday evening check-ins, where they voiced concerns before they could fester. A kitchen whiteboard on which to express frustration or gratitude, anonymously. Even brief walks by the river when an argument seemed likely to erupt. She realized that true healing wasn't about returning to how things used to be. It was the act of naming pain, respecting each other's boundaries, and adjusting expectations around what friendship owed each person. Now, if someone needed solitude, it was respected. If Rachel needed to vent, or Zoe wanted to skip out on a group movie night, no one questioned her motives. In the churn of daily life, work deadlines, bursts of city noise, heartbreaks and small victories, these new boundaries didn't mark the death of connection, but its maturation. Sarah's quiet epiphany, The value of vulnerability. On a crisp afternoon, Sarah found herself alone in the kitchen, the windows fogged by the steam of simmering soup. She scrolled through her phone, pausing at an old group selfie from sunnier days. It would be easy, she thought, to cling to nostalgia, to fantasize about the easiness they'd once had. But that era had demanded too much silence, too much swallowing of her own doubts. Could she want to go back, now that she'd tasted the freedom of hard-won honesty? No, she realized. If loss was the price of truth, it was not too steep, because what she'd gained was a new kind of courage, to speak up, to risk not being liked, to stake on real intimacy instead of endless self-censorship. Vulnerability was painful, but it also made room for joy that didn't feel counterfeit. This was not just a lesson for her group, but a foundation for every future connection Sarah would nurture. She thought of Julie, too, the one who now existed, mostly in memory, in occasional, awkward text updates. Their text thread had once been an endless stream of silly memes and "What's for dinner?" Now it was punctuated with careful, emotional uncertainty. Julie's betrayal, inadvertent or not, would always cast a shadow. But with time, Sarah could begin to consider her not just as the architect of their pain, but also as another flawed human who lost her way. Forgiveness, she decided, wasn't about forgetting, but about releasing the grip of past wrongs. Gradually, the group let themselves remember Julie with a reluctant warmth. Her creative playlists, her late-night cookies, her efforts to make every birthday special. They didn't erase what she'd done, but they also didn't let it be the color of every old story. They learned to tell tales that included her, but didn't end in bitterness. For Sarah, it was a revelation. When you let someone back into the narrative, even if only as a lesson, healing takes root for everyone. Lessons carried beyond. Willow Lane, the end of autumn brought transitions. Rachel accepted a new job offer in New York, driving away with the group's hugs still lingering in the chilly air. Megan started dating openly again, no longer haunted by the fear of drama echoing in their walls. Madison began therapy, her first session yielding more tears than she'd expected, but also a sense of hope. Zoe, who once tiptoed through every group contest, blossomed into an advocate for healthy conflict, a skill she took into her own job, where she finally spoke up about a long-standing workplace issue. And Sarah decided to write, turning their collective pain into essays she hoped might help someone else feel less alone. These lessons, the importance of boundaries, of transparency, of kindness, even when relationships fray, were not strictly about surviving a house divided. They became blueprints for how to move through the world. Real friendship wasn't built on shared trauma, Sarah realized, but on the daily work of honesty and repair. There would always be temptations toward secrecy and self-protection, yet now she deeply believed that there was no shortcut around truth. The cost of honesty could be heartbreak, but more often than not, it was possibility. Reflections. Under the Boston sky, Sarah sometimes took the tea out to the Charles just to watch the water and think. She'd journal about the years on Willow Lane, their joys and crises, and their strange rebirth as wiser, if less naive, friends. The feeling that lingered, finally, was gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the capacity to grow larger than it. She saw clearer now the kind of friend she wanted to be, and the kind of friendship she deserved. Hard lessons had shown her where her boundaries lay, but also how far she was willing to extend forgiveness and trust when it was truly earned. It was through this lens that Sarah began reconnecting with friends outside their house, too. She reached out to former roommates, cousins she'd neglected, and even her parents, with a new commitment to openness. More than once, she found herself starting uncomfortable but necessary conversations, sometimes confessing her own failures, sometimes just listening as someone else unburdened a secret. Vulnerability, it turned out, was contagious, in the best sense. In making room for imperfection, she realized everyone had more space to be themselves. A new commitment, radical honesty. As the year ended, the group of remaining friends crafted a new kind of contract. It wasn't formal, but they all agreed. Over a potluck dinner, surrounded by old photos, in laughter punctuated with melancholy, that from now on, honesty was the gold standard. They wrote a house manifesto on a torn piece of craft paper. Speak your truth, even when it's awkward. Take responsibility for your part in conflict. Forgive, but don't force forgetting. Give each other space and the benefit of the doubt. Never weaponize someone's vulnerability. Sarah looked at the tacked-up manifesto with pride. It wasn't a guarantee against future mistakes, but it was a declaration of values. When trust is shaken, she thought, the only way forward is to rebuild, not in secret, not by shortcut, but together, honestly, brick by brick. A closing season, an open chapter winter in Boston was a quiet, cold thing, but also beautiful in its own way. Crisp air, early twilights, and the comfort of warm rooms filled with the hum of new rituals. The Willow Lane house, for all its scars, somehow felt more like a home than ever. Laughter returned, no longer forced, and when sadness came, no one hurried it away. The kitchen fridge grew thick with sticky notes, words of encouragement, silly inside jokes, sometimes simple reminders like, "You matter." The group didn't pretend that everything was perfect. There were days when someone would stand looking out the frosty window, wondering if their trust would ever fully knit back together. Still, now they talked openly about it, finding comfort not in promises of forever, but in their ongoing willingness to recommit, morning after morning, choice after choice. Sarah reflected on all this as she watched snow gather on the old brick steps. She understood, finally, that surviving betrayal and heartbreak doesn't mean erasing what's lost. Instead, it's about honoring the lessons and leaning with hope into whatever comes next. In learning to love each other with eyes wide open, they'd given themselves the greatest gift: resilience, the kind born from hard truth, shaped by collective courage, and nursed back to life with gentle forgiveness. The final lesson. In the end, Sarah found the lesson wasn't about other people at all. It was about herself. She had discovered her own voice, her ability to stand up for what was right, and her capacity to forgive without forgetting. She could walk through the city, past their favorite haunts, and instead of only recalling loss, she remembered the strength they'd all found. The Willow Lane chapter had left marks on her heart, but not scars of regret. Rather, a map of all the places she'd learned to trust again. And as another spring neared, it didn't matter that the group was smaller or changed, only that what remained was real. Looking to the future, Sarah realized that every friendship, like every city street, carries the echoes of old conflicts and the light of new hope. In the end, she and the others had chosen not to hide from their story, but to live openly within it, learning, stumbling, making amends, but always coming back to the table, again and again. The final lesson was simple. Authentic friendship asks for courage, patience, and the grace to start over. Sarah, surrounded by her chosen family, let herself exhale, a little older, a lot wiser, and proud of the imperfect, enduring love that only honesty can bring.